Hello and welcome to Paint the Past. I'm your host, Amaris, and today I'd like to take you with me while I explore the history and cultural significance of Sedlec Ossuary in the town of Kutná Hora, about an hour outside Prague in Czechia, formerly known as the Czech Republic. While we discuss the events that led to the creation of this work of art in bones, I'll be painting one of the skulls displayed in the ossuary. My reference photo comes from the user Olga1205 on Pixabay, and I'll leave the link to the photo in the video description. This chapel contains the skeletal remains of an estimated 40,000 people. Their bones form chandeliers, a coat of arms, garlands, and architectural details. But Sedlec Ossuary is not a curiosity created to shock modern viewers. It is the result of a very specific set of historical conditions, a confluence of religious belief, demographic crisis, and medieval burial practices. As I paint, we will walk through that history, how ossuaries emerged, why Sedlec in particular exists, and what this place meant to the people who built it. An ossuary is a structure used to store human bones after the soft tissue of the body has decomposed. In some cultures, they are boxes or chests only big enough to contain the remains of a single person, while in others they are buildings, like Sedlec Ossuary, which we're discussing today. The term ossuary comes from the Latin ossuarium, which, sensibly, means a place for bones. The larger building-sized ossuaries are also known as charnel houses. Forms of ossuaries appear in many cultures, but in medieval Christian Europe, they served a practical and religious purpose. Burial near a church was highly desirable. It placed the dead close to holy ground and communal prayer, but churchyards were small and death rates were high. To solve this problem, bodies were buried temporarily. After decomposition, the bones were exhumed and were relocated to an ossuary, after which the grave space could be reused. While reusing graves may seem strange now, this was not considered disrespectful. In fact, it was common practice at the time. Sedlec's story begins in 1142, when a Cistercian monastery was founded at the site. The Cistercians were a reformist monastic order known for discipline, agriculture, and simplicity. According to tradition, in 1278, the abbot of Sedlec was sent to Jerusalem by the king of Bohemia. When he returned, he brought back soil from Golgotha, the site of Christ's crucifixion, and scattered the soil over the monastery cemetery. Whether this act was literal or symbolic, the belief took hold, and the cemetery became known as holy ground. Once the cemetery gained this reputation, people across Central Europe wanted to be buried there. Sedlec became an international burial site, attracting the dead from Bohemia, Poland, Bavaria, and surrounding regions, and for decades the cemetery expanded. In the mid-14th century, Europe was struck by the Black Death, a bubonic plague caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis, carried by rats and passed to humans through the bites of infected fleas. It killed between 30 and 60% of the population in some areas. An entire family could die within a few days. Sedlec Cemetery filled rapidly with plague victims. The sheer scale of death overwhelmed the existing burial systems, and this was only the beginning. Some 50 years later, in the early 15th century, the region was affected by the Hussite Wars, which was a series of conflicts that followed the execution of the religious reformer Jan Hus. Once again, thousands of people died. The Sedlec Cemetery was overcrowded far beyond capacity, and something had to change. Around the year 1400, a Gothic chapel was built at the center of the cemetery. Its upper level served as a place of worship, while its lower level became an ossuary. Bones from older graves were exhumed and transferred here to make room for new burials. At first, the bones were simply stacked, ordered but undecorated. They remained this way for centuries. In 1511, historical records suggest that a blind Cistercian monk began arranging the bones into large pyramidal stacks. This introduced a sense of order to the ossuary. However, it was still primarily functional, a storage space rather than an artistic one. That would change only much later. About 350 years later, in 1870, the Schwarzenberg family, who were local nobility, commissioned a woodcarver named František Rindt to reorganize the ossuary. Rindt approached the bones not as refuse, but as art material. He bleached the bones with lime to whiten them. He created a massive chandelier that contains every bone in the human body. He formed garlands and chalices of skulls, and constructed the Schwarzenberg family coat of arms entirely from bones. He also signed his name in bones. The arrangement we see today dates almost entirely from this period. To modern viewers, decorating with bones can feel disturbing or like a violation of the rules of social acceptability. But within medieval and early modern Christian belief, bones were sacred. Christian doctrine held that the body would be resurrected at the Last Judgment, and that bones were integral to that resurrection when the soul and body would be reunited. Bones were not seen as remnants of death, but as components of future life. Ossuaries functioned as memento mori, which is Latin for remember, you too will die. This tradition was meant to encourage humility, moral reflection, and an awareness of the impermanence of life. In death, all social distinctions disappear. Sedlec's ossuary is a memento mori on an architectural scale. Sedlec's is one of many European ossuaries. Other famous ones include the Paris Catacombs, which contains the remains of over 6 million people, the Capuchin Crypt in Rome, the San Bernardino alle Ossa in Milan, and painted skull ossuaries in Austria and in southern Germany. They all emerged from similar conditions, including high mortality rates, limited burial space, and a cultural willingness to live alongside death. Modern Western societies tend to hide death. We separate the living from the dead through institutions like hospitals, morgues, and funeral homes. In medieval Europe, however, death was a visible and constant presence. The existence of ossuaries like Sedlec's reflect that difference. They're not about shock. They're a way of integrating the dead into everyday life. Today, Sedlec's Ossuary is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It functions simultaneously as a historical monument, a religious space, a site of tourism, and a preserved window into the medieval worldview. The bones remain where they were placed, not hidden and not forgotten. Sedlec's Ossuary exists because of a specific combination of belief, crisis, and necessity. It is an example of how past societies managed death when it was impossible to ignore. My painting of the skull is not meant to be shocking or disgusting. It is a reflection of my fascination with the beauty of human biology, diverse cultures, and the way bones remind us that despite our differences over space and time, much about the human experience is shared between all of us. And while we may not know the exact stories of the people whose bones we see today, they remind us that much of what they would have experienced are things that we're familiar with: fear and comfort, pain and contentment, frustration, disappointment, love, and joy. These experiences are things that we all share, and they give us a kinship with the rest of humanity, regardless of when or where we live. Thank you for coming along on this exploration of the social and historical context of a skull and femurs from the Sedlec's Ossuary. If you've enjoyed this foray into the past and my artistic process, I'd be thrilled if you choose to join me for future episodes. See you next time.